Every day just after 9 o'clock here on Times Radio, we discuss the big stories of the morning. We're joined today in the studio by Manveen Rana, the host of the Story podcast. Morning, Manveen.
Hello.
We're joined not in the studio by the former Tory leader, William Hague. Morning, William.
I'm coming in a few weeks.
You are. We're very excited
to see you. I'm looking forward to that new studio and all of that.
Yeah, it's going to
be... once again from Wales. Yes, good morning.
Did you see the Eclipse last week, William?
No, I didn't. I was travelling. I was in Italy, and it wasn't visible from where I was.
Well, so it's a shame, because people who really wanted your reaction to the Eclipse might be disappointed, but do not worry, because we spoke to a gentleman named John Coleshaw, who told us what William Hague's reaction to the Eclipse might just sound like.
Yes, well, I think William Hague's eclipse view might be that I think it was opportune that the moon only blocked out the sun for a short amount of time. I think if it blocked the sun out forever, that might not bode well for life on Earth.
It was one I recorded earlier, actually.
Yeah. What was so good about that is we had John Coleshaw, who was a genuine Eclipse fan. He was on a boat outside of Greenland. He'd gone there to watch the Eclipse.
Wow. And
one of our listeners just said, would you mind just asking him what William Hague would sound like responding to this? So we did customer requests, and the first customer request was of you. That wasn't bad, was it?
It was pretty good.
No, I'm very flattered.
Yeah.
So he once called Tony Blair. He got through to Tony Blair's Prime Minister pretending to be me.
Did he?
Which is like what's just happened
to Burnham,
Prime Minister, actually. And Blair only realised it wasn't me when he kept calling him Tony, because I always insisted on calling him Prime Minister.
Oh, really?
But otherwise he would not have known, I think.
And was that for a TV show? That's quite a leery thing for John Coleshaw to do, isn't it? That's a bit on the edge, isn't it?
Terrifying that he got through.
No.
Yeah, this was nearly 30 years ago. But he got through. He also, the suspicious thing was he started asking him if he could borrow his Cher exercise videos.
Have you ever been hoaxed, William, before we move on to actual stories of the day? Because it's an interesting point about Burnham, that Susie Wiles, I mean, he is the Prime Minister. Yeah. I mean, it's not good, that, is it? Has that ever happened to you? Anyone got close to hoaxing you?
Well, not that I know of. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily know, of course, unless you find out about it afterwards or discover it in the course of it. So not that I know of, but it is... it shows, for a new Prime Minister, that just shows that, the phones need changing, the security protocols need adopting, the special phone that a Prime Minister needs using, all these sorts of things. But it's presumably part of the teething troubles of being a new Prime Minister.
Can I ask one other thing before we move on? Because I'm genuinely into this question. Is it a bit degrading for the Prime Minister of Great Britain to be texting the Chief of Staff of the President of the United States? I mean, if Burnham is the Prime Minister, should he not be? He shouldn't be texting a flunky, should he? He should be talking to the big chief, or not at all.
He should. I suppose I agree with that, but actually, in the case of the Trump administration, there are only a few people who have any real influence over the president. One of them definitely is Susie Wiles, the Chief of Staff, who is a kind of stabilizing influence when she exerts herself to do that. So actually, I don't think... Although most of the time you would say to your own Chief of Staff, why don't you text Susie Wiles?
Yes.
I think probably when you're forming the relation... I wouldn't criticise him for trying to do that, but definitely they need to sharpen up their procedures in number 10.
And to have fewer phone numbers available online. We should know from Boris Johnson's experience that you need to be careful.
I don't know if we know exactly how this happened, but in the American press over the last week, there have been reports that Susie Wiles' phone has been hacked
and
in a really
denied
smart
it's to do with
way.
This, haven't they?
But I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Shall we give you a whistle-stop tour of some of the stories we've been talking about this morning on Times Radio Breakfast? And the Russian embassy in London say the UK will face consequences after the Sunday Times revealed how British-made drones were used in strikes on deep targets inside Russia. Lillian Greenwood, as Labour's Work and Pensions Minister, responded to Russia's latest threat to the UK.
Well, our message back to the Russians is that we stand with Ukraine. We've stood with Ukraine throughout this time when the Russian illegal invasion. We will continue to do so, and we won't be bullied in this way.
Mark Galeotti, the founder of Mark Intelligence, told Times Radio Breakfast that although not in a conventional sense, Britain has been and is at war with Russia.
Putin himself says that, in effect, Russia is at war with Europe. But there is absolutely no signs that they are preparing some kind of imminent military response to that. It is this whole spectrum of non-military ways in which Russia can try to bring consequences to bear on us.
We've learnt this morning about a whole group of children who are becoming violent, but without there being a particular cause of it. A report from the Children's Commissioner for England, Rachel D'Souza, says young people are going under the radar.
About 70% of the referrals to Prevent, which is doubled. It's gone up. It's huge. It's about 5,000 kids a year now. About 70% of those referrals are for non-ideological radicalisation. And of course, the counter-terrorism police and Prevent were not set up for that.
So we're going to ask this morning whether all of those issues we'll cover, whether Richard Tice is right that we need to look for the bright side of climate change, and should we track our loved ones and partners on surveillance apps. Social media, phone etiquette has been a little running theme of the programme today.
Well, the Russian embassy in London has said Britain will pay after UK-made drones were used to help Ukraine strike targets in Russia. What can Russia do to make Britain pay? William, I wonder what you made of this statement that we've had from the embassy that was pretty threatening and effectively said, London, the deeper you get involved in this, the deeper the consequence will be.
I think this is a standard Russian reaction, as you heard from Mark Galeotti. They've said this sort of thing before when other British weapons have been used by Ukraine. The Russians use lots of weapons given by other countries. They're currently using ballistic missiles from North Korea, drones made in Iran, jet engines for drones that are made in China, ammunition from all over the place. So they have no qualms whatsoever about their allies helping them out with equipment. Well, of course, Ukraine has to do that as well, and we're one of those friends and allies. So we should not at all be intimidated by that. In fact, really, the whole West should be stepping up the support for Ukraine, which is in desperate need of Patriot interceptors, because at the moment the Russians are killing a lot of civilians, doing a lot of damage in Ukraine through ballistic missiles that can't be intercepted, and we've used up the Americans have used up most of the Patriots in Iran, fighting Iran. So we should be stepping up support. We should not be remotely intimidated by this sort of statement.
Well, Mamin, what we heard from the government, actually, they said we won't be bullied by Russia this morning.
Yeah, which is what this is. I mean, this is very much a threat. Whilst Putin at home to a domestic crowd, if you were monitoring Russian TV, they say this all the time, that they are already at war with NATO. As far as they're concerned, NATO is completely supporting Ukraine, and that's why they haven't already won. They don't really believe that. Every time they see a bit more help, they want to be able to punish it. I mean, as William said, North Korea, Iran, China, they have huge support for the Russians, and yet nobody bats an eyelid. And in a way, I do think that's partially our fault. I think because the West has dithered and faffed and hasn't had a strategy from the start. The Trump administration seems to change its mind every week, particularly on the Patriot interceptors, as William was just saying. But even before that, when Joe Biden stopped the Poles being able to supply kit to
planes,
to Ukraine.
the whole row about the planes.
From then on, we've basically we've decided that every time we supply something, that is now an escalation. And I think there is a real danger the moment you start in this bitty
such a good point.
Escalation. It's past 9 a.m. I feel like we can probably get away with saying Karl von Clausewitz without people throwing their radio out of the window. Apologies if you just have. But this is the real danger in not having a strategy to begin with. You've got to set the limits of your strategy at the start. Otherwise, you end up spiraling out of control with these the small escalations, which you can never quite be certain what the other side will do. So just last week, the US intelligence report did actually say that they think Russia might now have some sort of attack on NATO, whether that's a big cyber attack or whether it's a small incursion into one of the Baltic states. They think that's more plausible now than it has been at any point in the Ukrainian war. We are entering quite a dangerous phase, but in a way it's because we've managed the strategy so badly.
Because we set ourselves limits that we were always going to probably break in the future, and then we broke.
And I think the former foreign minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba used to say, the West, the only strategy we had was that we wanted Ukraine to win, but we didn't want Russia to lose. And that is a world of trouble.
Yeah, you can't be a little bit pregnant is the thing
exactly.
that we've said a lot this morning. William, Mark has got in touch. Can I put this point to you, see what you make of this? I do not understand why British equipment and munitions is being used inside Russia on non-military economic targets. It should only be being used within Ukraine in those areas invaded by Russia, not across its borders into Russia itself. There's an ethical argument to wrestle here with. There's a distinction between defensive, protecting Ukraine from the skies, and going into Russia and actually not even hitting military targets there.
Well, unfortunately, in warfare, particularly modern warfare, you can only defend yourself by going further behind in the enemy lines. If the Ukrainians could only attack that part of Ukraine that Russia has occupied, they couldn't. Then all Russia does, if in that situation, which is how things started, is they have all their logistics, all their supplies, and all the places that launch their drones and missiles just back in Russian territory. And you can't defend yourself if you can't attack those things. Being able to attack far behind the front lines is an absolutely essential requirement for survival in modern warfare. So the Ukrainians have to do that. Those are entirely legitimate targets. And unlike the Russians, they do concentrate on things that are important to the Russian war effort. They're not indiscriminate attacks on civilians.
And we should have perhaps supported that earlier, because I remember, James Heap, is it James Heapy, the defence minister? He came on this programme 3 years ago, and in an interview he sort of accidentally said he wouldn't mind if British weapons were used in Russian territory. And there was a big diplomatic fuss about it, because that wasn't even the position 2 years ago. I don't think that's actually shifted in time.
That's exactly my point, though. I think we've actually sort of tied the Ukrainians' hands on this war from the start, because we decided it would be a massive escalation if they were to attack Russia, even though they were being attacked. We've sort of set limits on what they're able to do and what we'll support. And as a result, I think it's a much longer war. You end up in this mad attrition trap, which might not have happened if we just let them do this earlier. Because the attacks that are happening in Russian territory, whether it's wild berries, their version of Amazon, or whether it's to sort of fuel depots or oil infrastructure, they're having a huge impact on the population and morale and support for the war, and that could have happened years ago.
Before we move on, I know lots of other subjects to do. I just want to ask this one question. I'm slightly obsessed with it, Rosie. You have to forgive me of this. William, you'll know this. I'm so interested in the campness of Russia. I find their military posturing. I find the language they use, William. It is theatrical, was the word Mark Galeotti used, but it's camp, it's kitsch, it's kind of
flouncy butchness.
The flouncy butchness of Vladimir Putin. Is there something in the Russian character that there is in this area? Do you think, William? You've dealt with these people.
Well, they are very concerned to show they are still a great power, and of course, when it comes to nuclear weapons, they are a great power. But in many other ways, they're not. Of course, their population is declining. Their economy is now under huge pressure. They've made a real blunder in starting this war. They're not. They feature nowhere really in all the great technological advances that are taking place in the world outside the military field. So they are a declining power in the world, and they hate that idea. And so this is all part of showing, no, we are big.
Yeah.
It's
all very shiny medals and phallic rockets, isn't it?
Well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the military parade. Shall we move on from flouncy butchness to something else? Front page of the Times today. We've been talking to the Children's Commission on the programme today, warning that British children are being intoxicated by extremism. Some of the language here is frightening. Fixated by violence, sharing videos of beheadings online, for example. But what is unique about this, the extremism isn't necessarily in any political direction. The conclusion is that the violence is the point all by itself, which poses the really challenging issue, Manveen. How do you tackle it when there's no sort of and this is young teenagers, there's no ideology underpinning this, so how do you fix it?
Great question. I'm not sure anyone has an exact answer yet. To be honest, I thought this was an amazing intervention by the Children's Commissioner, because I hadn't been aware, I don't think most people are aware, that so many people are being put forward as potentially a risk. and yet they all get referred to prevent, which to me just sounds mad.
Yeah, but that's the only place they can go is possibly.
How have we got a system where that's possible? Yeah, I was less surprised that this isn't mixed with an ideology. Look at America. For decades now, we've had so many high school shootings and killings. They're not about ideology. They're about a fixation with violence and control and wanting to be empowered through violence. And, I don't know if this is big. I feel like 30 years ago we used to have debates about whether violent computer games and violence on screens and violence on social media was having an impact. And I think it probably clearly is. That and access to weapons. And yet the fact that we're still sort of only thinking this is a danger if it's associated with an ideology and only putting these things through prevent, I think is completely mad.
So is the answer, or maybe William has, because he's been in government, is the answer to make prevent exist for all types of violence that where influence is being brought to bear? It doesn't have to have an ideology, it's just simply the act of influence. Or do you need a prevent for Islamism and Nazism and a non-ideological prevent called stop, and stop is just for violence generally?
Well, you probably do, but of course this will just be, as long as we allow social media to function in the way that it does, particularly in relation to children, this will just get a bigger and bigger problem. So we'll end up spending billions of pounds on such different programs. Part of the answer in the interim is what the Children's Commission is advocating. Curfews, bans on advertising, limits on scrolling, blocks on strangers contacting child users. This needs doing, but ultimately I think a free civilized society has to say this model of social media is unacceptable, the addictive model of social media, and we should be aiming for social media where you pay a subscription, where you're using it's not using you, and it's not addictive, and you use it to contact your friends and to learn things, but it's not throwing at you all the time more and more extreme cases in order to keep you hooked so it gets your data and the advertising.
Are you agreeing with that, Mandy? Because that sounds very nice and lovely, but it sounds completely unrealistic to me, that this is a business model based on addiction, and that's how they function.
It is, but
you'd have to change them. You'd have to effectively obliterate them and start from scratch.
Sure, but cigarettes, alcohol, these are all sort of business models based on addiction. We've managed to put in bars before to stop people accessing them before a certain age. I think we could do that with social media if there was enough effort put into it. I also think, because it is social media, it's also sort of, young people having access to quite violent porn at a really young age. I think we should look at our definitions of what is ideological too. It's not just sort of a fascination with violence. I think prevent should extend its remit to look at sort of misogyny. The Andrew Tates, the sort of the influence of violence against women, which is also, I think, being inculcated by social media at a very young age now, which has not happened before.
Yeah, and whatever you do, we've been reporting all morning, and we've talked with William about this a lot, the social media case the legal case against Facebook. Now, that could win. I mean, that could get $1 trillion off Facebook and it could change its business model. I mean, I'm sure it won't do, but it could do.
It could change how Instagram and Facebook operate, but it's not just that, isn't it? It's YouTube, it's TikTok, it's so pervasive on the internet, and if you change those platforms, presumably others crop up, or people are on the dark web. It is, as we've discussed so many times, very difficult to police how children use the internet.
I think it's harder for children to get onto the dark web. I think, if you look at Australia, people will find ways around, but actually for a lot of people it does just free up time to go and do other things. I'm all for that.
Yeah, that's the dream, isn't it?
That's the dream.
Stay where, read a book, as ever the advice is, read a goddamn book. Manveen and William, stay where you are. We've got climate change, and we're going to get some relationship advice from Manveen Rana and William Hague.
Oh, God, help you.
Get ready for that. Through the day's news with Manveen Rana and William Hague. Reform UK's Richard Tice has caused a stir by saying we should stop being so arrogant as to think we can stop climate change. Instead, he wants us to look on the bright side. He said increased temperatures are helping the English wine industry. Problem solved. Let's stop talking about it. William, you're not really very right-wing for a Conservative. I've said this to you before. But I am interested in the right-wing approach to climate change, because if you look at polling, most people are worried about it. Most people who've sweated through this dog's breath of an English summer will be worried about it even more than ever. Net zero has all sorts of practical problems within it that the right has, I think, in many ways correctly identified. But what is the position? What is the right-wing position on climate change that the Conservatives should embody versus Reform, do you think?
Well, I might not seem very right-wing now, but I'm where Conservatives started, really, of a Conservative wants to conserve most of the best things in the world, if possible, which includes our environment, our nature, the world we have evolved into, and because we're not suited to any other world, any different type of climate. So we do have to, so a Conservative definitely needs to take climate change very, very seriously, and also base policy on actual facts, and the facts are that the climate is changing rapidly. So I start from that position. But I also agree with people who say, well, you can't do it all in the UK. We're doing many good things in the UK. But it can't really, it's not the best idea to have policies in the UK where we have to do things that that similar countries don't do, and where we give ourselves the highest energy prices in the world in the meantime, and end up importing fossil fuels because we won't dig them up ourselves, so we're still burning them in the end. We need a sensible policy where we really push renewable energy, but we understand you need an energy mix until all the solutions have been arrived at. So I think it's fine to criticize how net zero is working, and to have alternatives to that, but to take climate seriously. And unfortunately, those comments by Richard Tice, that's not taking it seriously. To say enjoy the hot weather, well, does he understand that if the mid-Atlantic current breaks down in future years, Britain would be plunged into freezing temperatures for half the year? There'd be no enjoying the hot weather, and climate change would have these kind of catastrophic effects.
Yeah, he said, of course the climate changes. Where's the evidence? Net zero is going to stop it. Where's the evidence? There's no evidence. I wonder if we've actually sort of gone backwards a little bit, if the kind of consensus on climate change or net zero has been eroded over the last few years.
I don't think it has. I think when you hear something like that, it just sounds astonishingly, insufferably complacent, because the scientific consensus is there. There are things we can do about climate change. We all know that. It's the very basic understanding of science will show you that. I think there have been debates, and, William's right. Earlier this year, it felt like the political juggernaut was very much in the slow down net zero. I think this summer, it's very hard to tell the populace that net zero doesn't matter. It's very hard to tell people that climate change isn't happening because we're feeling it. And I think perhaps the scientific lobby hasn't always been very good at communicating what a degree's difference will do. And actually now nature has made that pretty blatantly clear. I walked down my road in London and it already looks like autumn. There are brown leaves everywhere. I was in the country over the weekend. It's, you walk around and there are dust storms around you. Everything is so dry. There are brown fields. We interviewed a farmer on The Story last week who said he wouldn't be farming now because it's unaffordable. It's only because doesn't have the heart to sack people that he's going to carry on. The yield has been so low. And to sort of think that it's okay because some English winemakers will compensate for that, I think is just astonishing. And I think most people now, having gone through a summer where you've seen 2 trains derailed in 24 hours, we've seen we don't have the infrastructure for the kind of change that is coming. We're feeling it when you can't sleep at night because it's so hot, and that has a knock-on effect on productivity. We haven't talked enough, I think, in the political debate around this. We've talked about the crazy costs of net zero, and they are, it's a lot. We haven't talked about the even crazier costs of not doing something about climate change.
But that's the point, I think, we have to leave this there, but with this point, that's such a good point. There's a distinction, William, between net zero policies and climate change. And I think what's happened is we've been lied to about net zero policies, because people have said net zero policies, it's all jam. There's no downside, there'll be more jobs, there'll be more energy, there'll be cheaper energy, everything in the garden will be rosy. And that is not true. And because, William, we've been lied to about net zero, you end up with people rejecting notions about climate change. And actually it's a disservice done by our politicians that they've made this issue harder than it needs to be.
Well, they thought that was the right thing to do, of course, and that the whole world was going to join in doing it. And then it's become clear, well, actually, a lot of the rest of the world is going slower. So then you have to say, well, are we putting ourselves at a very serious disadvantage when we're 1% of the world? We should be doing a lot on climate change, but we shouldn't be going faster than the slowest other country, and faster than the fastest other country in the world. I think you can criticize net zero, but take climate change seriously. As long as you've got good alternatives, then what else are you going to do in the meantime in order to keep bringing down emissions and to preserve the natural environment?
We've got one final thing to talk about very briefly. It's got a lot of us going this morning. Inside the Times too this morning, Jamie Oliver has told the paper how he lets his wife track him on his phone. Is it a useful way of managing busy lives or an invasion of privacy? Matt, are you on Find My Friends? Do you have any of your friends, family members tracked?
No, I think it's creepy. I will sometimes, if I'm meeting a friend or a sibling or something at a certain time, and we can't find each other, we'll track each other for an hour. You have the ability to sort of say, this is my location.
Send my location, yeah.
For like an hour, and that's kind of enough.
Tom Noonan, who presents Early Breakfast, is 28. His mum still tracks him.
No.
Yeah. We've got more than 2 or 3 people in our office.
There's a generational divide, though. That people in their 20s, it seems to be routine to have friends, close friends, family members on Find My Friends.
What do you think?
I couldn't bear it.
Really?
I don't need to know where everyone is, and everyone doesn't need to know where I am.
Would you care if someone knew where you were?
Well, so, I say this because while, as an investigative journalist, for a little while I was followed, and when you were followed, it has a really weird impact on you. It makes you sort of stop and think about everything you're doing because there are people following you. I remember me and my producer, we used to walk into, we'd walk out for lunch and we'd be like, God, somebody's probably watching. They can see that we're really dithering. And now we've gone from 5 different cafes because we couldn't decide what we wanted. And that's awful. And that's the pressure of knowing that you're being watched. I wouldn't want it.
William, does the fragrant Fion know where you are at all times?
No, I think that, like Manfi, occasionally we turn on those things if we're trying to catch a plane or so, or meet up in a difficult place, for half an hour. It is useful to see how close is somebody to arriving at the destination. That can be useful. But otherwise, no, really, what you need in a relationship, trust. Trust is not monitoring somebody all the time. Trust is knowing you don't need to monitor somebody all the time. And I think it's actually quite damaging and undermining long term for people to be tracking each other, as well as terrible overprotectiveness on with young people. As I know, lots of young people, indeed, their mothers are tracking them all the time. My mother had no idea for weeks on end, but that meant she was confident I could look after myself. So we need to go back in that direction, in my view.
Yeah, there's a question in all technology. What do you sacrifice at the altar of convenience? So my wife has me on her phone, so she knows when I get home, if I'm 20 minutes away on the train, it fits in with our family life more easily. She doesn't need me to text to say I'm 20 minutes away. She can just see that I'm 20 minutes away.
How do you do surprises? If you were going to go and buy something for her from a particular shop, a women's shop, how do you make sure she doesn't know you've done it?
I do know of an engagement that was ruined.
There we go.
Because someone said they had a meeting on Tuesday, and normally they work from home on a Tuesday, so my friend went on Find My Friends and saw her soon, very shortly to be fiancée in Hatton Garden. So that was the surprise somewhat blown.
I have a further problem is that my wife has access to all of our banking. So whenever I buy her presents, she automatically sees because she has all the money.
That's not a surprise then, is it?
No, but I don't have any of my own money.
I think shared bank accounts is very different.
I didn't actually think we'd have relationship advice to give, but now I feel we do.
I feel Manvi's going to take me away for a brisk talking to in a moment.
I think shared bank account is different to constant surveillance of being able to know where someone is every moment.
Oh, okay. I just thought it's just nice, but you're all right, you guys, with your concerns about privacy and your principles. You come on this programme with your clearly defined, well-articulated principles.
I think I'd be much happier with a shared bank account than shared constant location sharing.
Okay.
There we go.
William, Manveen, you moralistic so-and-sos. Very useful stuff as ever. Great to speak to you. Thank you so much. We do another Tuesday chat, don't we, on this programme.